On this episode of Athletic Training Chat, we have a very interesting study spotlight almost. This is a conversation with Courtney Fernandes, who had just finished up at the University of Toledo and was working with her master's group on this. And the project is nicknamed Project Chaos, which I thought was intriguing in and of itself. And so we touch base on what this is, what it means, what impact it could have, and where it could lead in the future for looking at bridging some of the gap between rehab in a clinical setting in a rehab facility or athletic training room, and then working on that transition back to athletic activity and just how that works and how this could potentially bring some insight into that. As always, we are powered by Mueller Sports Medicine. Please continue to check them out for any sports medicine needs. They're always coming out with new stuff. If you were at NATA, they released a bunch of new items, well worth checking out. Also, as you're listening to this episode, if you are listening through the podcast form shortly after the intro music here coming up, we have two videos that show exactly what this project was and how it is run, which we tried our best to do to describe. But if you're having a hard time fully picturing what's going on, if you go to YouTube and get to about a minute 45, minute 50 in, you'll be able to see those videos to have a better visual of what's actually happening as we go through and have this discussion on what Project Chaos is and its application. Without further ado, please enjoy the episode. Welcome to this episode of Athletic Training Chat. We are on with Courtney Fernandes, who I have had the pleasure of knowing for quite a while, as she was a former student at UWL when I was there. Did we work together? Might have worked together twice? Or was it just the one season?
Just once during football, and I was only at football for a couple, like maybe 6 to 8 weeks. It was pretty short, honestly.
Unfortunate.
Yeah.
Anyway, but yeah, we got to know each other there. Courtney was very involved in a lot of things, always had great ideas, and has just finished her master's degree from the University of Toledo, and now is moving on, as we were just talking off air, to athletic training residency at Boston University, and we were having all kinds of conversations from that and expect a follow-up episode here in the future. But today we are talking about her master's research that she was a part of, and what really caught me on this was the name of it was Project Chaos, and anything like that just sounds interesting. It has nothing to do with this conversation, but it really reminds me of Project Mayhem from the Fight Club. It just kind of sounds like it's around that same thing. But like I said, nothing to do with that. But we had Courtney on to just kind of talk about it because it is really interesting stuff. It is, at least for my non-super researchy brain, very detailed and intricate, just going through the materials that she sent me and trying for me to make some understanding of it. So I'm really excited to hear more about it and how it applies to athletic training. So before we get into what Project Chaos is, I just wanted to turn it over to Courtney to fill in anything else that she'd like to about where she's at, what she's doing, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, I think you kind of hit most of it. I don't really have a whole lot to add in terms of the past, I guess. I think moving to Boston is kind of just what I want next, and just that next level will be really good. In terms of the research, I didn't really have any past experience. Undergrad, we had a few like research papers and things like that, but no like lab type work. So I think coming in when we were told about our thesis, I was kind of like, okay, this is going to be like just like what am I like just like what am I doing? So the first few months were probably like pretty rough, and I think I got on this project with my research team maybe like the end of September, early October of my first year, and it was kind of just a mess at uh, at first, just with how this uh, 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 project is just it's so it's uh, novel, and we're just kind of like running with it. So yeah, I think I did not expect to like the research part of things as much as I did. For a while there, I thought about my PhD, but those thoughts have since passed. So
they may come back and get you. I know how that goes. I started mine late, so never say never.
Yeah. So I think I just hope that I can keep I can keep up with the research. And I think it's a part of the field that we need to do more of.
Agree with you there. Yeah, going back, I really wish I would have paid more attention or tried to get involved to at least have some baseline understanding of it, because now I pretend to be a part of it now, but I fully am aware that I'm better on the logistical side than I am on the actual like writing and or trying to do any stats interpretation. So learning as I go. So understand that completely.
Yeah.
If you could try and give kind of the overview of what Project Chaos is, subtitled, if I get this right, Interpersonal Collision Avoidance Task, a Dynamic Measurement of Sport. What does that mean in terms of what you guys, because this was a big group. I think there had to be like 6-8 names on the PowerPoint that you sent. So
yeah, 6 of us.
So yeah, large undertaking.
Yes. I guess to try and like basically explain it, we were hoping to like so when we think about return to sport protocols, most of them are linear. They're they're not what sports are like. So like the things like the hop tests and things like that are not what sport is like. So we tried to develop a task that would kind of be more like sport to kind of help with these protocols, because our return to sport rates, like post injury, aren't like where they need to be.
So if I'm understanding correctly, we go and we do, the progression back, and we do some sport specific stuff, probably some cutting and some different things, very controlled environment. Yes. And then really there is kind of a gap between that controlled environment to then starting to put them back into the small-sided games or
Exactly.
group drills or some of that. So Project Chaos is trying to figure out how to put an uncontrolled scenario into a semi-controlled environment to help
Exactly.
bridge that gap, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. Just to kind of help with how do they move from the clinic-based rehab to what's on the field.
So you can kind of two questions, and you can pick whichever one makes sense to go first. We talked a little bit off air about this Newell's model of constraints and how that applies to the study. What was the development of the task, or how you guys started measuring it? Like how you came up with what that bridge is. So if one makes more sense before the other, I'll leave that up to you since you.
Let's start with the Newell's model of constraints. I think
Perfect.
that might just kind of make a little bit more sense. At least in my head, it does. So basically, with that, you have three factors that all go into a movement. So the task, where they are, and then the person themselves, and that can all be influenced by their perception and then their movement. And if one of those three factors changes, then their movement will then change as well. So in sport, there's all three of those factors working all the time. So they have to navigate those all changing at once. And in rehab, we don't really do that. Yeah.
So then what kind of tasks did you guys design? And this may go into a little bit more of the description of the leader follower.
Yeah.
So what was that next step then?
I don't entirely remember how we came to this task specifically. There had been some other research article in some human movement journal where they had two people with lasers, so not like sport light, but they had two people with lasers back to back, and then the lasers were on the screens of both people. So and then they had to like run this task where like they would kind of go in circles. So we kind of used that. So basically where they're both running the same task with the same goal. So in our project, it was one would run north south and then one would go east west, and then they would hear a whistle and then pivot and then keep going. So they would turn either right or left, which we would tell them before, and then keep running the task. But I don't even know what the question was at this point.
Just talking about then what the leader follower status was in it.
Okay. Yeah. So without trying to get too down in like all the stats and stuff, basically we looked at who was leading and who was following. So in most of the trials, we could like visually tell who was who was crossing the middle first,
Okay.
and who was not. I can actually send you a video of one of the trials where it's like one of them would like bolt, and then the other would kind of like take a like wider path.
Okay.
In terms of the stats, we used one of the variables of the cross current to kind of look at that in with a number value, and that just was like, I guess, more of like the uh, 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 timing of like when they got there. So we kind of expected that the players with a history of injury would be the follower for most of the task, and they were, but that did seem to change with the perturbation or the whistle.
So just to summarize, to make sure that I'm following here. So basically you have people running crisscrossing, kind of like just like a T pattern, if you will.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yep, like you said, if somebody's running up and down versus side to side.
Yeah.
And I think the video, when you send that to me, just for, if you're listening to this thus far, which I'll put in the reference, we'll start this with the video so people can kind of see it. So as we're having this conversation, they can have that mental image of it, which I think will be really good. But really what you're looking at is, did the injured person, like, they're obviously trying to avoid each other and figure out how to crisscross with each other. And then really whoever is the leader could come down to personality, obviously that comes into it. But then you guys are seeing injury risk or a previous history of injury being, a factor that they would maybe not be as aggressive trying to go through and count on the other person.
Yeah, exactly. Let me just pull something up. So we had 9 groups, and I think all but 2 groups, the person with the history of injury was the follower, like for most of the time. So there was a few cases where they weren't.
Sure.
And I think there's lots of reasons like why that might be. Some we or that's just the way that works. Like we can't tell, but I think that has that's like something that we should keep looking at, because like why are they following? Why aren't they leading?
So what do you see as the direct impact to then trying to help with return to play? And I know we'll talk about future research and things like that, as I'm sitting here listening to you, trying to figure out in my head, like, okay, how do I take what you're saying and use it as rehab? Do we basically just run a similar thing? What is that telling us? How do we go and get that person with that history of injury to be more confident? So is that something you guys kind of, again, I know you said small sample size and there's some things and whatnot, but the ideas had to have been flowing, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think it's hard because this hasn't been done before, so we're all just kind of like, okay, so what does this mean, and like go from here. I think in terms of how we use this clinically, I think we could run a test like we did. Obviously, I don't think it would need to be in the lab and with motion capture, like that is all like good to have, but you didn't need that. So things like that, and like putting in those unpredictable parts of sport into rehab would all help as well.
How do you see this comparing to, again, talking about my like own rehab history and things like that? You try and throw some uncertainty into things in the AT center. We're going to do it on a unstable surface on a balance pad, or we got to rebound off a Bosu ball. All not truly unpredictable because people aren't having to react like this. Versus doing some reaction things, if they're running towards you and you're pointing a direction, they don't know which direction that they're going. Where do you see the utility of something like this fitting into that? And then I guess if there's any kind of criteria to then that, and that might be further research, I understand. So when you might feel comfortable sending them back to, small sided games or whatever it may be.
Yeah. I guess off the top of my head, I don't have like anything in terms of like criteria that like we like that. I think there's lots of parts of it that we can look at, whether that's like mental, because like I feel like that's a big part of it. Like we don't really challenge them in the way that we do, or in the way that sports do. So things like that, and just those perturbations. So I'm just like in terms of soccer, just like the start stop reacting to different people, in terms of how we do that like clinically. That's kind of where I'm struggling to like just like
Sure. No, and
ideas right off the top of my head. I think it's hard because we've gotten so like used to our protocols that are like, here's steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yep.
Like I think it's hard to kind of like think outside the box, and I hope that we can kind of keep doing that.
Because really, just kind of reading back through some of our stuff we sent back and forth, is I feel like this is something we all kind of knew, that like there had to be, that they weren't necessarily ready. You guys have now just been able to start the process of actually demonstrating that and confirming, and then maybe even seeing, like, as you mentioned, I think you said of the 9 groups, 2 injury history people were the leaders, but the other 7 were definitely the followers. And so there will be those ones, which, as there is with everything, that people don't follow the general guide of just what you think, but you guys are just showing scientifically that really is a constraint that we need to continue to focus on.
Yeah. I think another big part of it is psychological factors. So we looked at measures of confidence, fear, readiness, risk-taking propensity. I think those are the big ones.
Sure.
So like, looking at those in terms of how they might feel about returning, I think is what we all talk about, but I don't think a lot of people actually do take those measurements and like help get them to where they need to be.
Just on those, and if you don't have the names of them off the top of your head, you can always send them to me so I can put a link to them. Are those from what you guys did in the research side? Because again, something we probably should take into consideration, but amongst all the other things, it's hard to. But specific, tests, quizzes, surveys that you guys utilize, that might be quick and efficient. I will plead my naivete on this, but just recently read about the ACL RSI one that I've been doing this for 10, 12 years, had just never come across it, finally heard about it. And I was like, well, this would have been kind of helpful, to just simply hand someone a 1-page thing, easy to grade, easy to get a general sense of where they are feeling mentally about their ACL return. Versus just having conversation with them, which isn't necessarily bad, but sometimes if you can have something that's objective, that can be useful to not only you, but also to the athlete, and say, hey, look, like, according to your own answers, you're feeling better about this.
Yeah, exactly.
So, any ones that you would recommend, that out of this, I think those topics, those main headers you talked about are key.
Yeah, so we used RSI, TSK 11, GRIPS is the risk one, and then IKDC is just a measure of regional knee function, like how you feel about your knee health. And then we also used state trait anxiety measure, which I think was something that we thought was really beneficial. So I can send you those as well.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. And we can have those linked if anybody wants to find those and be able to utilize them on the regular.
Yeah, for sure.
Where do you see future research with this going? I know that might not necessarily be with you, moving on to a new position, but is that something that they're going to continue at Toledo, or that maybe you're just going to stay involved with?
I'm not certain if they're going to continue the project. I hope they do. I know they don't have a whole lot of students coming in, so that might be a little bit difficult, but
gotcha.
I do think they have hopes to try. In terms of like down the line, I mean, we hope to publish here in the next month or two. So hopefully that can kind of get the ball rolling. But yeah, I think we just need to keep looking at how we can change our late stage rehab to kind of like bridge that gap of getting them ready for sport.
Awesome. Anything about Project Chaos that we didn't cover that you think would be useful?
Not really off the top of my head. I think just like thinking about who they are, like as a like whole, and not just like on the field, is a big part of it as well, and how like things that might not be like on the field, or like that they might not experience in the clinic, will like translate and then to the field. Yeah.
I think that makes a lot of sense, with personality type and all the different things that can play a role into how confident they're feeling in returning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, with that, ready for the AT chat questions?
Yeah.
So first one, where do you see athletic training going in the next 5 to 10 years?
This is a hard one. I feel like I haven't really been like in it for that long yet. I've just been a student for the last 5 to 6 years. I mean, I did work for the last 2, but I don't know. I think we're kind of like on the right path in terms of like branching out to like different professions and settings. But I think the one thing that I hope to is that that like most people will like know who we are and what we do, and that we're not just water boys. I think that's the one thing that I'm like, okay, it's been like how long now, and we just keep having to like tell people what we do, and yeah.
Yeah, more than just taping ankles and filling coolers, huh?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I think a good marketing rebranding might do us some good. Not losing sight of those things, but highlighting some of those other more advanced, we'll say, things.
It's not just all about the tape and the water.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
You referenced you're a young athletic trainer. That's totally fine. If you could go back and give yourself some advice, whether, and you can, that could be your undergrad, it could be the start of your graduate school, whatever it may be, what would that advice be?
I think the one thing that I wouldn't say like regret, but like I like think back on, and I wish I would have asked questions. I think in undergrad, I know there were times where I'm like I didn't like want to, because I was like, okay, I don't want to look dumb, or like maybe that's just a dumb like thing to ask. So I guess I wish that I didn't have that mindset. And I think just like thinking about being a lifelong learner, so to keep pushing for more and wanting to know more is kind of what I would tell myself.
Awesome. All very good pieces of advice that I would echo to myself as well. What has been the most influential resource you have found thus far in your career?
People. So whether that's on like Twitter, so like you I don't know if I messaged you or what, but we like got back to that talking with your coworkers and doctors and things like that will all kind of help you kind of like build your network, and I think that all just helps with so much, and will take you far.
Agreed with that. That's a fairly common answer. You did a nice job blending the people and the social media together, which has come across multiple times as well. As an AT in your role, how do you take care of yourself? I know you're in the middle of transitioning to a different role, but what are some of the things you do?
Yeah, I think it was hard. My first year was in COVID, and honestly, there were a couple of months where I was like, this is not what I want to do. So I think it was hard. But after a while, I realized that I just needed to take time for me. I think my first year I didn't really do that, and I just like felt like I just had to live and breathe work, and then I felt burnt out. And it wasn't probably until like December that I was like, this sucks. This is not how I want to feel. So at that point, I would take like whole whole days and just not do any work. So I think those boundaries is probably the most beneficial thing that I've done.
Absolutely. If you could change or eliminate one thing, could be a modality, a common practice, a mindset, or whatever you choose, in the field of athletic training, what would it be?
I think what first comes to mind is writing notes. I hate writing notes.
Fair enough.
I know that's not even like we can't do that. So I guess what I would say is that the mindset that you need to be like hurt to come and work with us. I think at the high school level, that is hard to kind of do that, just because I am just one person and I can't help all each kid. So I think I guess at the college level, which I will soon be back at, just that like there are things that can be done to kind of help before yeah.
Understand. Yeah, it's such a hard thing, that secondary school setting. I've never worked in it. I respect the hell out of everybody that does. At times it can almost feel like triage medicine because there's so many and there's just one of you and the hours are condensed. It's not like you can be there all day and have a steady trickle in, as it can work sometimes in the collegiate setting where classes may be a little more spread out or whatnot.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's so situational to be able to do that. But if you can get things implemented on a large scale, how impactful it can be.
Yeah, definitely. Most definitely.
Last question. What does being an athletic trainer mean to you?
So I think I'm still like learning what that means for me. But I think the person first health care. So like more than who they are in sport is a big part of it for me. And I think we all kind of need to think about that. I think sometimes we get all like bogged down in them in their sport, but then solving the puzzle and just being there for them for what they need, whether that's mentally, physically, all the things like that, and then being a lifelong learner to kind of to keep learning and growing with our patients.
I really like the puzzle analogy. I had heard that as much as I think it makes a lot of sense. So I appreciate that one. Well, kind of in closing, if people wanted to get in touch with you or connect with you, what would be the best way for them to do that?
They can find me on Twitter, ATC _ Court Fern. Instagram, I'm not really super active. And then email would probably be the best. And I think you have that. Courtney.a.Fernandes@gmail.
Okay, perfect. We'll link that up. So if people want to get in touch with you about anything or hear more about Project Chaos or anything, they can definitely do that. So
Let me know.
I really appreciate you taking the time and talking about this project. I hope they continue as well. I'd be very curious what more could come out of this, and if it can provide some more like practical implementation things would be really, really cool. So
I
I
think that's the
appreciate you
part
sharing.
that we're missing is like the whole like, okay, so what does this mean? What do we do about it? And I hope that in the
And that
next
is research, right?
we can get there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you again, and we look forward to talking to you in the future.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.